Welcome to the 313 Men, Money, and Marriage Podcast, the podcast where facts, logic, and reasoning are at the forefront of every conversation. I am your host, Andrew Johnson, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about mate poaching. And we're going to give a definition of that along with going over some of the statistics, and we will cover that here on the podcast here shortly. Just again, in the audience, remember there is a website that you can go to and sign up to get on an email list. The link is always in the show notes. And there is a YouTube channel available. It's called the Men, Money, and Marriage Hour. And so you'll be able to go to those sites and, like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. That does help with the algorithm. We're very new, so I'm just now figuring out how to do it. So we'll get that under control there shortly as we move forward. Now, today we're going to be talking about mate poaching and what that is. And I'm going to give you a definition of mate poaching and what that actually means. And here is the definition of mate poaching. This is pretty common. I mean, people have seen it before and have heard of it before. And this is what it basically says. It's the act of attempting to attract someone who is already in a romantic relationship. So basically trying to take someone's girl or guy away from them. I thought about this particular topic because there was a situation where a woman had spoke to me a while ago, and she had just told me, this was a long time ago, and she had told me that her best friend basically had stole her husband. And so she shared a lot of things with her best friend, and then ultimately her best friend ended up getting with the husband, and they began in a relationship. That relationship did not work out, but her relationship with her husband was essentially over. And that is an example of mate poaching. So here's what the statistics say on mate poaching and what it all entails. About 10 to 20% of new relationships began via mate poaching. People who are unfaithful in the U.S., it's about 26%. And I guess I'm not sure if this is marriages or relationships. I'm going to go on assumption it's marriage. I don't know. 75% of people report someone tried to poach them. So this happens pretty regularly, literally 3 out of 4 times, apparently. So that's a pretty high number. 63% of men and 52% of women attempted to poach someone for a relationship. And 43% of college-age men and 49% of women in the college age were successfully poached. So based on those numbers, we can see why people basically do it. Now, there's a variety of reasons why, which I'm going to cover here shortly. But one of the things is with mate poaching is that it tends to be a little easy. And we're going to get into why that's the case. It's probably one of the easier ways in some situations to find someone for a relationship, because it doesn't involve a whole lot of work on your part. You can just literally see someone else's relationship in action and then try and move in. But what are the psychological and sociological underpinnings? And why does this happen? Well, on the man's side of things, it's more of an evolutionary perspective. Men want to maximize their reproductive success. They want to maximize their reproductive success. And all that basically is saying is that men generally want to have the opportunity to have children with, women who are, the most prettiest and most attractive that they can. And peer influences can shape individual attitudes towards infidelity. A lot of it can be where you live at. It can be environmental. It could be a variety of different things. I'm going to give you an example later on about that. Well, actually, it's coming up here shortly. I'm going to give you a quick example on that and why that happens. Because where you live at and all of that does play a role into whether or not you might be involved in this type of behavior. Because a lot of it depends on what area that you're from. In some situations, it's more common. And so these are some of the things that you might, come across with that as the reason why men do it. I remember I counseled a guy a while ago and about children and having, he basically had 7 kids by 5 different women. And when I asked him why did he have so many children by these different women, His answer surprised me, but it really shouldn't have. But it did surprise me. He said that what other men in his neighborhood had done, they were basically doing the same thing, maybe earlier than he did, and he was just essentially copying them. Now, on the show, you hear us say that boys tend to copy and learn through imitation, and that is one example of where that might be the case, where you'll see other people, maybe uncles or other family members, older males, doing the exact same thing, and you just picked up that behavior from them, and then you copied them and did it yourself. So that's when you can see something like that happening. Well, let's see. And then it's also women, on the women's side, it's like a situation where they might see a guy who they are attracted to, checks off all their boxes. And then they'll say, well, yeah, he is with someone, but maybe, just maybe, I can get with him, and he'll, go with me. He checks off all my boxes. He's the kind of guy I want. And I don't want to have to go out into the dating pool. He's right there in front of me. So that could be an issue, pertaining as to why women would do that. It's sort of a lazy way to get a mate, because the person you want to poach is already essentially qualified. And when I say qualified, they meet your standards of what it is that you want. So if you know his romantic partner, you have data, especially if you're friends with the partner, because they might be telling you certain things about their relationship, and you have data. And now you can go in and, as they say, move in for the kill, to try and get that person to get with you. Who is doing the mate poaching? Who is doing it? Well, mate poachers tend to be high in narcissism, which is no surprise, unfaithful. They tend to be more extroverted and open to new experiences. Many women, in times when they're in failed relationships, will use the term, well, he was a narcissist, that's why that relationship didn't work out. But most of the time, a lot of times they say that. He doesn't have to be a narcissist. It just means it didn't work out, or you just picked wrong. But that's how they'll describe sometimes their male partners. But the way you can tell if a person's a male partner is when they have very low empathy. If they are a narcissist, they have very low empathy for what happens to you after the relationship is over. They never really cared about you much anyway. You were the one who was probably more attracted to them and more into them than they were into you. But maybe that's what attracted you to them in the first place. It's hard to say. What are the risks of mate poaching? Are there certain risks that come into play when we mate poach? Certainly, a person who does it, if you are, the word I would basically use is, in an area or community where everybody kind of knows you, you might have feel a level of guilt based upon what you did. But now, here's the deal. Some people who are, fall into that narcissistic category, they may not feel the guilt that, say, somebody else does. That doesn't mean that they didn't do anything wrong. It just means that they don't feel that it's that bad of a deal for them. But most people who don't fall into that category, most people will feel a level of guilt if it's found out, essentially. If you mate poach, it can be humiliating. People will find out that you did that, and then they'll be more guarded about their relationships when they see you come around or don't want you to be around. They'll be a little bit more guarded on that. It can affect stable relationships as society can deteriorate. Monogamy will be less valuable if it's a continued, repeated behavior or action that the society is continually doing. Well, we've been, our society, we've been dealing with this for a while. And I don't think the society's quote unquote deteriorated. It's something that we just know exists, and we just deal with it the best we can based upon the fact that it does exist. And so it is a situation. Now, I want to make this pretty clear here. It would be difficult to get into another relationship if you do mate poach, but it's not impossible. If you live in the same area. Now, if you were to move to somewhere else, nobody would know that you did it in the first place. Nobody would know that you did it, and it wouldn't really matter. It really wouldn't matter if you were moved to a different area or were dating someone from a different area. They may not know who you are. So people will know that. And, it's funny. I knew a guy who used to do this quite often, and he specifically would target married women. He would specifically target married women. And the only reason I think he stopped is because he got beat up pretty bad one time. That was the only reason why I think he stopped for a while. At least as far as I know, because after a while I just lost contact with this person. Like didn't see him as often. So that's an issue with it. What do you do if the poached relationship that you got into fails? You're still right back where you started from. You're right back in the part where you don't have anybody again. So it's not a guarantee that it's going to be a level of success when you mate poach. So it's something that you have to take into consideration for, so with that being the case, you have to take that thought process into it before you actually try to mate poach somebody, that there's a possibility that relationship isn't going to work. So then everybody loses in that particular situation. Even the person that was in the relationship lost maybe a good person. The other person, the mate poacher, loses. The guy or girl who was poached, they lose. The other person that lost the person, they lose. Everybody doesn't. It's a lose-lose situation all the way around. So it's not necessarily a great thing to engage in this type of behavior. So honestly speaking, there isn't quite as much benefit to mate poaching as you might think. My take on it is just, it seems to be an easier way to actually date and get involved with somebody. It just seems like it's an easier way to do it. And with that being the case, that's the reason why it's so common, so active. Some people, when the younger guys look at it as like a competition or a challenge, someone, I think I can take so-and-so's girl or this, that, and the other. It's very immature, but there's guys out here who think like this. And the consequences can be devastating, but I mean, some of them will still take the risk. They might think that it's cool, it's fun, it looks like, they're a player type thing and all that stuff. Well, like I said, there is a level of risk that is involved when you engage in this type of behavior, especially when you're dealing with people whose feelings and emotions pertaining to this. The last area I want to cover is, how do we protect our relationships from mate poachers? How do we protect ourselves from these people who are trying to mate poach, take our girl or guy or husband or wives from us? What are some of the things that we can do? Well, one thing that pops to mind when I first thought about this was we can limit our presence on social media. We don't have to be on so actively involved in social media types things, because that is part of where a lot of things could go wrong. Social media is always a top 5 reason for infidelity. That's where people meet old acquaintances, girlfriends, boyfriends, meet people who they might have had a crush on in the past and never said nothing. Years later, they pop up, they communicate through social media, and lo and behold, something sparks up, something gets going. And that is where you can find some of this mate poaching type behavior occurring. So your presence on social media, don't be too active on there looking or being found. Some people might try and reach out to you, go in their private DM and different things like that. And so obviously it can create some issues when you're looking at it from that standpoint. Place boundaries in your relationship by having safeguards in place to protect your relationship from outside influences. How do we protect our relationship from outside influences? Not that difficult if you put some parameters in place early. A reason why a lot of times these relationships don't quite, these poaching instances sometimes can be successful is because when you're in a relationship with someone, a lot of times you don't put any boundaries or anything in place. It's just automatically assumed that this is how someone is going to react and behave based upon the instant happening. And some people don't know how to deal with it or handle it, without being rude. One thing that you have to understand too, from the guy's point of view, sometimes we don't want to be very disrespectful to people and tell them, no, get away, this, that, and the other. And the same thing for women. Some women will be very polite and just say no, but the person might be persistent and keep trying. So the boundary in place is you need to let the other person know immediately so that they can put a stop to it. And then sometimes you don't even have to say anything to that other person. Sometimes you can just give them a look when you see them again, and they'll generally stop. That'll work probably about 90% of the time. That's a way to look at it. It can work quite often just by you just not even saying anything, just looking at a person and saying, I'm aware of what you're doing. You need to chill out. And most people will stop. Now, if the person continues to go on from there, then it's going to, obviously escalate into something a little bit more serious. But most of the time, you don't even have to say anything. And you could see the response of that person in body language and everything. You can see how they react from that. So some of the boundaries that you can put in place is just basically open, honest communication. When you notice a poacher making their move, so just let your partner know, hey, I don't know who this dude is or this, that, and the other, but he's been trying to talk to me. Or the guy might say, this girl here, you know her. She's been trying to holler at me. You might want to say something to her or this, that, and the other. And, that's letting the partner know that there's an attempt on the poaching is I think very, very important, because then your partner can, sort of address the situation without it getting, escalating to the next level. If someone poaches you in a relationship while you're in a relationship and is a friend of your spouse, it's best to let them know immediately. Remember, they have a lot of information about you. They have data, on you. So it's a good idea to let the person know right away and put a stop to it. When you have information on somebody and on their marriage and on their relationship, it is very, very easy for that person to touch on certain things or certain things that they know you like and sit back and say to you, they'll bring those things up. One thing that you might be able to do, some of the behavior that the poacher might do is they might be a little they'll touch a little bit more. So they'll touch you a little bit more. Nothing sexual, just more subtle. They will also be in your presence a lot more often. So they'll be around you a little bit more, more than what they would normally be, more than you would normally see them. And that's kind of risky, so you'll see them. And so that's some of the things you can be cautious of. When you start to see those behaviors, it works out to your advantage to let the other person know, because then it can, like I said, you don't want this to develop and go to a point where it gets too far. Because if it goes too far, then it creates more of a problem. The best way to deal with poachers is to stop it early before it gets moving. Because if you don't stop it early, it's going to create a problem. So let your especially if it's a spouse or married person, let them know immediately. Well, we're going to wrap up. I know this episode was a little bit short, but it is that time of the year where everything is going on and everyone's focused on, the election and stuff like that, obviously. So we try to keep the episodes a little bit shorter this time of the year, for especially during a presidential election year. And so we want to, thank you for continuing to support the show. And we will continue to deliver content, like I said, on a consistent, regular basis. We'll try our best to put something out every week. We're going to be making, I've said this 100 times, but literally we're going to be making some changes. There's going to be some bigger changes coming forward, and I'll tell you about them near the end of the year. Once we get to our end of the year numbers, which are going to be coming out pretty soon. So with that being said, until we meet again, we are out.